Okay, how many of you, the absolute first thing you did when you woke up this morning was pull out your phone, from under your pillow or a bedside table, wherever it is, and you gotta check the notifications, your social media, whatever it is you're checking on, but that's the first thing you do before you're even fully conscious in the morning. Okay, and then throughout the day, you're trying to work on stuff, but you have this impulse behavior to go pull out your phone or check on social media, on YouTube, whatever it is, right? And then, even at night, like, you can't fall asleep without watching that YouTube video. And, you might look at me and say, okay, Brad, you don't seem like the type of person to know much about this, right? You're sitting in the woods and you make Linux content. And I would say, okay, yeah, you're right. I don't know anything about social media. I've never had it. I've never used it. But what I do know about is actually impulse checking on stuff. Okay, so I had a few jobs for years where it was essentially I would need to be on call for a certain amount of time and constantly checking on stuff, and I would wake up in the morning and have that impulse to pull out the phone and check the work notifications and be like, all right, I need to go message these people. I need to put out these fires before they explode, right? And realistically, right, I could have gotten away with not checking for 30 minutes, okay? I could have, waited until I was awake enough to actually get on a computer and then type probably a far better reply than my, I just woke up reply, right? So really, I had to face this sort of same issue as a lot of people are going through today, where it's like getting unaddicted from that phone, impulse cycle of pulling out the phone constantly. And I want to kind of walk through a few examples of how I, got over that addiction, as well as just in general, how to stop being on your phone constantly. Because I know this is something a lot of people struggle with, maybe in the Linux community less so, just because a lot of us are kind of, very, very anti-technology, maybe a little bit ironically, but anti-technology. But if this is something you struggle with, then, hopefully you will get something out of this video that can help you work on it. The first thing I want to talk about is actually kind of bringing it back to years ago when I was in school. Okay, I was a lot more into English and history than math and science, which might be a little bit surprising because I know a lot of people into, Linux and computers and tech are into math and, science and stuff, but honestly, that wasn't me. I was into English and history, but that doesn't mean I was any good at it. And, I would get these, 10 or 15 page essays assigned, right? And I had to sit down and come up with a thesis statement for it. And then just write out the whole essay and make sure it was organized and all that. And it's that's impossible to start, right? You pull up a blank document, and I was using LibreOffice back in the day, so I would open my blank LibreOffice document, and I would just mess with the font for 10 minutes, and then I would get bored of that and open YouTube or open a video game and just do that for an hour. And it's I could never get started until the last day before the assignment was due, and then I would have that pressure of okay, now I really got to get this done, and then I would knock it out. And it's well, I did it then just fine, so why wasn't I able to do it that whole time? And it's because I was just used to having that impulse distraction, okay? And yeah, I was never really on social media, but I would open up YouTube and binge YouTube for an hour, especially when I was in high school. I broke this habit pretty quickly, and really the way I broke this was just taking a notebook and a piece of paper into a room without a phone, without a computer, and just sit there and be bored. Because if there's one thing that our brains hate more than doing that actual assignment, it's boredom. So if I hate being bored that much, eventually I will just start working on that assignment. And really, if you are just struggling to get whatever it is done, just, go to a room without the phone, without the computer, or if it's on a computer, get a cheap ThinkPad, don't even connect it to the internet, and just sit there and just be bored, and eventually you will start working on it. So that's kind of just talking about, getting work done if you can't, but I started this video saying, all right, in the morning, if you have that impulse to pull out your phone the second you wake up, how do you work on that? So I mentioned, I had a job where I had to be constantly, checking the phone, and, replying to messages, right? And I broke that eventually. And, well, how did I break that? And I did actually a couple things, but really the most important thing was I built a stable routine, which was every morning I would get up and I would go make breakfast, okay? Nothing else first, no phone, no computer, just go make breakfast, okay? And I would actually cook breakfast, okay? I wasn't just doing any sort of microwave stuff, right? I would really go stand there and cook breakfast and then eat it. And it would be, you know, a 30-minute process that I was not on the phone, trying to not even think about the work that I was going to have to do. And that fixed a couple different things for me. The second thing being that I had struggled with, especially on days where I wasn't like on call here. I kind of just, woke up and just stared at the wall for like 30 minutes. Like I didn't even want to get out of bed. And I think, a lot of people who are kind of in the situation of having a job they really don't like, or whatever it is in their life that they feel like, there's nothing for them to look forward in the day. And luckily I'm not in this position anymore, but I was for several years. And it took me like kind of building habits to break out of that. And one of those habits was making breakfast. And that gave me like, okay, this is one thing that I can look forward to in the day. Like, even if the rest of my day here, I have nothing to look forward to, at least I can look forward to making breakfast, right? And, I personally like breakfast a lot. It's my favorite meal. So that was what did it for me. But, you can come up with any variety of things to do, first thing in the morning instead of being on the phone, go outside and take a walk, if you're, into exercising, go for a jog. I'm sure, you've heard the exercising, helps you out with like depression or whatever. So that's one way to kind of combat that. And then that kind of brings me to the final point about, if you're going to sleep with your phone, you have your phone out, as you're trying to fall asleep, you like literally fall asleep with the phone in your hand, right? Oh, that's probably the worst case scenario. But really, if you feel like you have to, watch a YouTube video to go to sleep, or you're just, doom scrolling when you get into bed, the only real way to stop doing that is to just put the phone elsewhere, put it across the room so that you're not tempted, and so you can really break that association in your brain between phone usage and bed, because it's really a Pavlovian association there, right? You have this, thought process in your brain of like, okay, bed, phone associated, and phone is, stimulation and thoughts, and you really don't want to be thinking as you're trying to go to sleep, because, well, why do people have trouble falling asleep? It's because they can't stop thinking. They can't stop thinking about whatever it is, whether it's, worrying about work, or, that girl, or whatever is going on in your life, right? You can't stop thinking, so you can't fall asleep. Well, if you're on your phone stimulating your brain, right, that's not going to help you. Of course that's not going to help you. So if you can put your phone elsewhere in the room, and, unintended bonus to that too, if you have an alarm on your phone, right, and if you struggle to, like, get up with the alarm, if you have to actually get up and walk across the room to go shut off that alarm, it's going to help you out a lot, right? Anyways, so if you can just put your phone across the room, and if you really feel like you still need, something to do to, kind of get into the mindset of being able to go to sleep, then, like, read a book, right? I know that's, like, cliche advice, but seriously, do anything that's not going to be, like, stimulating your brain before you try to go to bed. And the more you can kind of build these habits and reinforce them, it's really just building good habits to counteract bad habits, right? And eventually, once you have enough good habits learned, you'll be able to stop, pulling out that phone on impulse to constantly, remedy the boredom, right? If you can just learn to sit there and be bored, you will ultimately be able to stop, having that phone addiction, okay? Anyways, this is not, to call you out, but hopefully if you do feel called out, you can use this, as a sign to start working on your life and make your life better. Hope you got something out of this video, and I will see you next time. Peace.